There was a program on Danish television called American Dream. It would invite some young Danes living in the United States, talk about their lives and what they had seen and heard. In 1994, the program featured a 22-years-old young man. Before the interview began, the young man painted one part of his face black and the other white. He claimed that it was meant to symbolize good and evil. It was a strange thing, however. The young man was called Peter. He had killed his mother with his own hands 3 years ago, so it didn't seem too strange to appear that this was the case. During the interview, he recited a poem about the darkness and light of life. Peter enjoys people look at him differently. He even sees himself as a sort of embodiment of the forces of chaos and order. After the program aired, a psychiatrist watched the interview and, based on Peter's performance, he gave the young man a score of 39 on the antisocial personality scale, which is an extremely high score since there are only 40 out of 10. Peter was born on February 15, 1972, at Roskilde Westland University Hospital in Denmark. His father, Lundin, who was a Mason, served in the U.S. Army. While stationed in West Germany, he met a young German girl, Anna, Peter's mother. Later, they married and settled in Denmark, and Lundin even built their own house with his own hands. During his childhood, unlike his peers, Peter was often abused by his father, blamed by his mother. The young boy would always look out the window, gaze at his peers, who were accompanied by their parents. He envied those children who had parents with them and were able to play with them, because his father spends his days drinking at home, in addition to working on the construction site. When drunk, he would also beat Peter and Anna. Peter remembers that his father was once even arrested for beating them. In 1979, the emotional rift in the family became wider. Because of his chronic drinking, Lundin developed blood clots, and he lost some of his mobility and was unable to continue working. Financial difficulties have occurred in this family. At first, Anna had no choice but to mortgage the property in order to care for her young Peter. However, they were unable to pay the debt. The house was repossessed by the government. Later, because of the medical care in America and Lundin had served there, they decided to immigrate to America with 9-year-old Peter. They first bought a house in the town of Ormond Beach, Florida, where they operated a motel. A few years later, they moved to Maggie Valley, North Carolina, where they bought another house. As time passed, the emotional ties of this family finally broke. Anna no longer tolerates her husband's continued alcoholism. She chooses to divorce Lundin. The man didn't refuse. No one would like to have someone around them who was always accusing them, but his condition was for Peter to follow him. At first, the man moved around with 14-year-old Peter. They moved to Los Angeles, where they lived for a few weeks, and then to New York City and Boston. Because he couldn't find work, in the end, they stayed in Miami. Lundin found an apartment there and resumed working as a mason. Later, Lundin and Anna are reunited, and she once again follows Lundin and Peter. While attending school in Miami, Peter juggled various jobs to supplement his family's income, including working as a waiter. When he was 16, he decided, leave school, work as a mason with his father. Peter experienced his parents' quarrels, his family's financial difficulties, left his country, immigrated to America, where he was exposed to a new culture, a host of awful situations that challenged his perceptions. All these gradually pushed him toward antisocial personality disorder. In this period, he also came into contact with cocaine, cannabis, and other drugs, which he had never encountered in Denmark. Later, the family returned to Maggie Valley, where Peter also resumed his high school education. However, for Peter, studying was not his purpose. He also secretly sold marijuana to his classmates. In 1991, the poor family had long been in disarray. 19-year-old Peter, like his father, was completely addicted to alcohol and drugs. Both of them were often drunk and violent towards Anna, a situation so serious the well-meaning neighbors around them called the police several times to try to save Anna. However, when police came to the house to make inquiries, nothing was found. In April of the same year, at this time, Peter never went out. His hair and beard had not been groomed for a long time. Anna picked up the scissors, tries to cut Peter's hair. As a result, an extremely messy altercation occurs. Angry Peter choked Anna directly. Minutes later, Anna's hands, which had tried to resist, dropped helplessly as she was killed by the son she had carried to term in October. Lundin heard noises. He steps out of the room, finds Peter becoming panicked, holding his head in his hands and crouching on the floor. His wife, Anna, collapsing on the floor. After the case, Lundin didn't think much. He wanted to keep his son out of jail. So he took Peter in the car, transported Anna's remains to the city of Buxton, then buried her on a wide sandy beach. On November 1st of the same year, the weather was fine. People were sunbathing, surfing, and walking on the beach. However, because of the washing of the sea, the remains of a woman buried on the beach came into view. The remains were wrapped in a blue blanket covered in black plastic, bound with duct tape and yellow rope. Soon enough, news of the murder appeared on the local news. Peter and his father also saw the reports of the murder. Realizing that Anna's body was covered with their fingerprints, they fled to Canada to avoid arrest. However, regarding the murders, police in America and police in Canada always cooperated. On June 6, 1992, Peter and Lundin were arrested in a hotel room in Toronto. In July 1993, Peter was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment in Dale County, North Carolina. Meanwhile, Lundin was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment as an accomplice in the case. In addition, both men were ordered by the court to be deported to Denmark upon completion of their sentences. After Lundin had served his sentence, he was deported back to Denmark, where he remarried a new wife and had a child. While serving his sentence, Peter appealed his sentence and deportation. Although he failed to overturn his conviction, on February 16, 1995, his sentence was reduced to 15 years. During this time, he appeared on Danish television. Although Peter's sentence was reduced to 15 years, but, it is all know, Holdsheim is located in North Carolina. At the time, all of the prisons in this state were so desperately short of prison capacity, they chose to halve the sentences of inmates incarcerated after a specific date. On June 4, 1999, Peter was escorted by the police to the airport in Copenhagen. Peter didn't go to find his father. In 1996, while serving his sentence, he married a woman named Tina, who has a teenage daughter. In fact, just because the program aired on Danish television, many Danish women contacted Peter, wanted to marry Peter. In the fall of 1999, Peter was kicked out of his apartment by his wife and daughter during a domestic violence incident caused by an alcoholic. As a result, he moved to a single male dormitory where Peter frequented a brothel next door. Because of this, he became acquainted with one of the owners of the brothel named Marianne Pedersen. She was only 36 years old. She and her husband had 2 sons, Dennis and Brian. At first they owned a brothel, where she earned money as a sex worker. Since her husband's death, she had been widowed, which is how Peter was able to become romantically involved with Marianne. On July 3, 2000, Marianne and her 2 sons were declared missing by her stepson. At first, he was unable to reach his stepmother and Dennis and Brian by cell phone, so he went to their house. At the front door of the house, he found a note that said they had gone on vacation. As someone who had lived with the family for many years, he detected the unusual wording of the note. Feeling skeptical, he opened the door, eased his way into the house. Entering the house, he noticed something was wrong as the house was in disarray. Furniture had been knocked out of position. Garbage was strewn all over the place. There was vomit in both toilets of the house, and a strange odor in the basement. After filing a missing person report, the police began investigating the disappearance. It was during the initial search of the house, the police noticed scattered blood stains around the house. Further investigation revealed blood on Marianne's bed, in her car, and in the cellar of the house, between the tiles in the bathroom and even on the cutting board and blender in the kitchen. By investigating relationships, police found the man closest to Marianne, Peter, and searched his premises. He claimed that Marianne and her children had gone on vacation elsewhere, requested that he be able to paint their house, as he was a mason. On July 5th, police arrested Peter and charged him with murder. The truth of the case has been found by them. All 3 victims were killed and dismembered by Peter. One victim was dismembered in the basement, which was why there was a strange odor in the basement, and 2 victims were dismembered in the garage. Local police told the media, the basement and garage looked like a slaughterhouse. Despite the marks that Peter attempted to erase by cleaning up from the remnants of human tissue, investigators were able to observe that Peter had used an angle grinder in the garage, and there were approximately 100 visible cut marks on the floor, indicating that he had used an axe in the process of dismembering the remains. After being arrested, Peter changed his story, but he did not confess to the murder. He explained that on the night of June 16th, he heard screams coming from the basement. When he went into the basement, Dennis and Brian were already lying on the floor. They had been stabbed by Marianne. fearing that when she would continue her attack, he began to beat her. However, even though he did not hit her hard enough, she died. In the end, he did not choose to call the police because he thought the police would, cause of his previous murders, refuse to go believe his story. So he decided to dismember the remains. On October 10th, Peter confessed in his story that he committed the murders. He claimed the murder started because he heard Marianne sweet-talking another man on the phone, and then he fought with Marianne and her sons, broke their necks with his bare hands. After the murder, he put the remains in the freezer. But this story is not fully corroborated by forensic evidence. In addition, the remains of Marianne and her 2 sons were never recovered because of the time elapsed since the case occurred, and although it is known their remains were dismembered and dumped in various local dumps, however, that garbage has already been disposed of. The prosecutor hoped that Peter would admit to the crime of intentional homicide. However, he did not. Therefore, this case must be decided by a judge and jurors. March 5, 2001, when the trial began. An official told the jury directly that few cases in recent years have garnered as much attention as the one to be handled today, and this also applies to the publicity surrounding criminal cases. In addition, he pointed out that in the nearly 8 months since Peter's arrest, both the judge and jurors had inevitably been exposed through media references to the case, which raised concerns about his influence. And he went on to say that, based on your subsequent decisions in the case, you cannot consider anything you were not told in the courtroom, on television. During the course of the trial, you must take your attention away from what you hear or see outside the courtroom. Peter always insisted that he didn't mean to kill the victim, but the jury didn't believe him, and in the end, he was convicted of intentional murder and manslaughter. The Danish Minister of Justice commented that the circumstances, nature, and extent of the crimes committed by the defendants were in a state of terror and fear. One could only respond to them collectively. Take the right security measures by imposing life imprisonment. Since Denmark has abolished the death sentence, Peter was sentenced only to life imprisonment. In same year, an association called the National Association for the Execution of Peter was created, which did not call for the reinstatement of the death penalty in Denmark, but rather for the adoption of a special action, which was exclusively to have Peter's life sentence commuted to death.